Tonight, I have three true stories about ordinary journeys that became something else entirely. A car that arrived before the real driver did. An online stranger who found a home that had never been shown online. And a medical transport driver whose threats became much more frightening after his face appeared on the evening news. In each story, the danger begins with something familiar. A ride home, a private message, a trip from a hospital. And in each one, there is a moment when the person telling the story realizes that a stranger knows exactly where to find them. For privacy, identifying details have been changed. The events themselves are based on accounts shared by the people who experience them. Turn off the lights, check that your doors are locked, and stay with me. This is Night Evidence. Story 1. The car at the bus stop. This happened a few years ago on New Year's Eve. I had gone into the city with 3 of my closest friends. We spent the night doing what people are supposed to do on New Year's Eve. We moved through crowded streets, waited too long for drinks, shouted over music, and promised each other that the coming year would be better than the last one. By the time the clubs began to empty, the celebration had burned itself out. The streets were still bright, but everyone looked tired. Glitter clung to the pavement. Half-deflated balloons rolled along the sidewalk whenever the wind caught them. Somewhere behind us, people were still singing, although midnight had passed hours earlier. One friend lived close to the city, so she went home on her own. The remaining 3 of us lived in the same distant suburb. Getting there was never simple. First, we had to take a bus for about 45 minutes. Then, from the final stop, we needed a taxi or an Uber to reach our houses. I had lived in that area my entire life. I knew every main road, every shortcut, and every turn that led toward home. Even half asleep, I could have recognized the route. The 3 of us boarded the late bus and sat together near the back. During the ride, the energy of the night disappeared. Nobody talked much. My friends leaned against the windows and closed their eyes. I watched the city lights become smaller, then fewer, until there was mostly darkness outside. We reached our stop at around 4 in the morning. The bus pulled away, leaving us beside an empty road in a quiet town. It was the kind of silence that only exists after a holiday. Every house was dark. The shops had been closed for hours. There were no pedestrians and almost no traffic. I took out my phone and ordered an Uber. Then we waited. We were tired, cold, and not completely sober. Our attention was not what it should have been. We talked quietly and watched the road, wanting only to get into a warm car and go home. A few minutes later, headlights appeared. It was the first vehicle we had seen since the bus left. The car slowed as it approached us and pulled over beside the stop. None of us asked the driver for a name. None of us checked the registration number. We did not compare the car with the information in the app. We simply assumed it was ours. The doors unlocked, and all 3 of us got in. The driver was a man with a heavy Eastern European accent. He did not introduce himself, and he did not say much. At the time, his silence did not feel especially strange. It was 4 in the morning. We were exhausted, and perhaps he was too. I gave him the destination, and he began driving. Within the first few minutes, I noticed that we were going the wrong way. It was not a dramatic change. He did not turn onto a dirt road or drive into the forest. He simply chose a road that led away from the most direct route to my house. I watched familiar buildings pass the window and tried to make sense of it. Navigation apps sometimes choose strange routes. Maybe there was road work. Maybe he planned to avoid a difficult intersection. Maybe I was more tired than I realized. I told myself not to overreact. My friends had become quiet in the back seat. One was looking through her phone. The other had her head against the window. Neither seemed concerned. So I said nothing. The car continued deeper into the sleeping town. About 10 minutes into the journey, my phone vibrated. I looked down, expecting a message from one of the friends who had already made it home. Instead, it was an Uber notification. Your driver is arriving at the pickup location. For several seconds, I could not understand what I was reading. I looked at the notification, then at the man behind the wheel, then back at my phone. The app showed that my actual driver was at the bus stop we had left 10 minutes earlier. The car we were sitting in was not the Uber I had booked. My stomach seemed to drop away beneath me. I suddenly remembered every safety step I had ignored. The app sends the driver's name, photograph, vehicle type, and registration number. I had checked none of them. I had placed 2 of my closest friends in a stranger's car simply because he happened to arrive at an empty bus stop at the right time. Then my phone began to ring. The real Uber driver was calling, probably to ask where we were. I stared at the screen and let it ring. I was afraid that answering would reveal the situation to the man driving us. I did not know who he was, why he had stopped, or where he intended to take us. Most of all, I did not want him to realize that I knew. I looked toward my friends. They still had no idea. Every instinct told me to say something, but we were inside his moving vehicle. There were 3 of us, but we did not know whether he carried a weapon. We did not know the area of town he was taking us toward. If I confronted him, and he locked the doors or accelerated, the situation could become much worse. I needed him to stop somewhere public. I forced myself to breathe normally. Then I leaned forward and told him I felt sick. I said I needed water and asked him to stop at a service station. He glanced at me. "We aren't far from your destination now," he said. That answer frightened me more than I wanted to admit. We were not near my home. I knew that with complete certainty. Yet he spoke as if he knew where the journey would end. I insisted. I told him I might be sick inside the car if we did not stop. After a moment, he agreed. The next few minutes felt much longer than they were. I watched the road for a petrol station, a convenience store, any place with lights and cameras. I kept my phone in my hand and tried not to look nervous. Finally, a bright service station appeared ahead of us. The driver pulled in. The moment the car stopped, I opened my door. I told both of my friends to come inside with me. There must have been something in my voice, because they did not argue. We left the car together and walked quickly toward the shop. Only when we were beneath the fluorescent lights did I explain. "That is not our Uber," I whispered. Our real driver was still at the bus stop. The tiredness vanished from their faces. We agreed that none of us would return to the car. We stayed close to the shop entrance where the cashier could see us, and told the driver that a friend lived nearby. We said we would walk from there and that he did not need to take us any farther. He became frustrated. He insisted that we get back inside. He told us he could finish the trip. His tone was not openly violent, but the more he pushed, the more certain we became that leaving had been the right decision. We refused. Eventually, he drove away. We watched his taillights disappear before calling a licensed taxi. None of us relaxed until the new driver took the familiar road toward home. Even now, I cannot say what the first man's intentions were. Perhaps he was an unlicensed driver, hoping to earn cash from people leaving the bus. Perhaps he believed we had mistaken him for a taxi and saw no reason to correct us. There may be an explanation that is careless rather than criminal, but there are details I still cannot comfortably explain. Why did he stop directly beside 3 young women at an empty bus stop at 4 in the morning? Why did he begin driving without discussing payment? Why was he taking us away from the route I knew? And why, after we said we wanted to leave, was he so determined to get us back inside his car? The most disturbing part is how ordinary the mistake felt. There was no struggle and no obvious trap. A car arrived. We opened the doors. That was all it took. Since that night, I check everything before entering a rideshare vehicle. I compare the registration number. I look at the driver's photograph. I ask the driver to confirm my name rather than offering it first. Those precautions take only a few seconds. That New Year's morning, 3 of us learned how much can depend on those few seconds. The first story began with a stranger who happened to be in the right place at the right time. The next one is different. This stranger did not find the storyteller on an empty road. He found her through a screen. Story 2. The account that knew my address for 5 years. Reddit had been one of my favorite places online. My account was not famous, but it mattered to me. I had made friends there. People recognized my writing. I had built a small audience and a history that felt like an extension of my real life, even though I was careful to keep those 2 lives separate. I did not post my address. I did not upload photographs of my home or my children. I did not connect the account to my other social media profiles. I was especially careful about locations. I had not even publicly mentioned the country where I was living. I believed the account was anonymous. Then I received a message from another user. The person presented herself as a woman whose life looked strangely similar to mine. She said she also had a blended family with both adopted and biological children. It was a specific point of connection, the kind that makes an online conversation feel personal very quickly. At first, nothing seemed wrong. We talked about family life, parenting, and the complicated emotions that come with raising children from different backgrounds. The messages felt supportive. I believed I was talking to someone who understood experiences that many people did not. That sense of recognition lowered my guard. I did not reveal my address or send personal photographs, but I responded openly. I treated the account like a potential friend, rather than a stranger collecting information. Then, during one conversation, the person wrote something that stopped me completely. "Your house looks nice." I read the sentence more than once. I had never shown this person my house. I had never posted a photograph where it appeared in the background. I had not shared my street, town, or country. There was no innocent reason for an anonymous Reddit user to know what my home looked like. I did not respond. For a moment, I wondered whether it was a strange joke. Perhaps the person meant my online profile or had confused me with somebody else. I tried to find an interpretation that did not make my skin crawl. Then another message arrived, and another. The friendly tone disappeared. The person continued talking about my home as though they wanted me to understand that the first comment had not been accidental. Soon, links began appearing in the conversation. They led to street view images of my address. There was my street. There was the view near my home. There was proof that whoever controlled the account had connected my supposedly anonymous online identity to the place where my family slept. I blocked the account immediately. Then I began searching through 5 years of my own activity. I read old posts and comments, looking for anything that might identify me. a town name, a photograph, a description of a local business, a school, a time zone, a distinctive story that had also appeared elsewhere under my real name. I searched for clues the way an intruder might have searched for them. I found nothing obvious. That almost made it worse. If I had accidentally posted my address, I could remove it. If I had connected the account to another profile, I could break the link. A known mistake can be repaired, but I could not repair a weakness I could not find. After I blocked the first account, a new one contacted me. The message claimed that my address would be given to a drug dealer who had supposedly stolen me unless I sent money or personal photographs. The wording was bizarre, but the threat was clear enough. Someone wanted payment or images, and they were using my home address as leverage. I blocked that account too. Another appeared, then another. Every time I closed one door, the same person seemed to return through a different one. The usernames changed, but the subject did not. Some accounts demanded money, others demanded photographs, some repeated the address. Others sent new Street View links as if to remind me that blocking them had changed nothing. I stopped thinking of the messages as words on a screen. Every notification became a possibility outside my window. I would hear a vehicle slow near the house and wonder whether it belonged to the person behind the accounts. I checked the locks repeatedly. I became more aware of what my children said near open windows and what could be seen from the street. The stalker did not need to appear in person to change the atmosphere of our home. Simply knowing that someone could appear was enough. The police did not feel like my most useful first option. I had messages from disposable accounts and screenshots of publicly available Street View images, but I did not have a confirmed identity or evidence that someone had physically approached the property. Instead, I contacted people I trusted from the pub where I worked. They knew the area and knew my family. I asked them to watch the house and keep an eye on the children. It was not a perfect solution, but it meant that other people were aware of the threat. Meanwhile, the accounts continued. There were eventually around 20 of them. 20 different names attached to what felt like a single presence. The number itself became exhausting. Blocking one account no longer felt like an action. It felt like a ritual. Open the message, take a screenshot, block the account. Wait for the next one. My old Reddit profile had once been a place where I wrote freely. Now, every part of it felt contaminated. Old friendships felt unsafe because I no longer knew who might be pretending. Every comment looked like another thread that could be followed back to my real life. Finally, I deactivated the account. 5 years of writing, conversations, and community disappeared because one stranger had learned how to reach through anonymity and touch my real address. For almost a year, I stayed away. The messages stopped when the account disappeared, but the fear did not end immediately. I remained cautious about speaking to anyone online. When a friendly stranger mentioned a shared experience, I wondered whether it was genuine or another carefully chosen disguise. That may have been the cruelest part of what happened. The person did not only take an account from me, they damaged my ability to trust the ordinary kindness of strangers. After a year, I decided to return with a new account. I did not come back because I had solved the mystery. I still do not know how the person discovered my location. Perhaps a small detail led to another profile. Perhaps a username, writing sample, or piece of personal history connected two parts of my life. Perhaps the person knew more about me before the first message than they ever admitted. I returned because I did not want fear to make every decision for me. But I returned differently. I no longer assume that an account is anonymous simply because it does not contain a real name. A collection of harmless details can become identifying when someone patient puts them together. A photograph does not need to show an address if it contains a reflection, a landmark, or metadata. A story does not need to name a town if its details exist nowhere else. And a stranger does not need to stand outside your home to make you feel watched inside it. Sometimes, all they need to do is send you a picture of your own street. In the first story, the women escaped because they persuaded a stranger to stop the car. In the second, the storyteller escaped by abandoning an identity she had spent 5 years building. The final story begins with a mother and her sick child waiting for a ride home. Unlike the first driver, this man really was the person assigned to collect them. That did not make him safe. Story 3. The driver on the evening news. My son had been fighting cancer for more than 2 years. His treatment hospital was in another state, almost 3 hours from our home. Even with insurance, the cost of cancer had changed every part of our lives. When our only car broke down, we could not afford to repair or replace it. We began relying on medical transportation provided through our insurance. The service contracted private drivers who used their own vehicles to take patients to appointments and bring them home. Most of those rides were uneventful. The drivers understood that their passengers were often exhausted, frightened, or in pain. They arrived when they were supposed to, drove carefully, and helped with bags. Then we were assigned a driver who lived in our own town. My son had just completed a week-long hospital stay for chemotherapy. We were both desperate to go home. Our ride had been arranged days in advance, and the driver was supposed to be waiting at the scheduled discharge time. He was not there. After more than an hour, I called dispatch and asked for an estimated arrival time. They contacted him and reported that he was just entering the city. He would not give a specific estimate because of traffic. It was frustrating, but I assumed he would arrive within 30 minutes. We waited. Hospital waiting has a particular weight to it. You are surrounded by movement, but your own life feels suspended. Staff members change shifts. Other families leave. The light outside the windows changes. Every hour feels longer because you are already tired before it begins. 2 more hours passed. I called dispatch again. This time, the driver claimed he was only just crossing the state line and remained about 2 hours away. His 2 explanations could not both be true. He had said he was entering the city hours earlier. Now he said he had not even entered the state. The ride had been scheduled well in advance. He knew when and where we needed him. Still, my son and I had no alternative. We could not simply begin a 3-hour walk home. We stayed at the hospital and waited for the person who had already lied about his location. He finally arrived more than 8.5 hours after the scheduled pickup time. It was late, and I was beyond irritated. My son had just endured chemotherapy. He needed rest, familiar surroundings, and his own bed. Instead, we had spent the entire day waiting for a driver who could not explain where he had been. Within the first few minutes, I learned that he lived in the same town we did. That made the delay even harder to understand. A normal journey between our town and the hospital took about 3 hours. Somehow, this trip had taken him almost 3 times as long. As he placed our bags in the trunk, he repeatedly referred to my son as a girl. My son had a clearly masculine name and looked unmistakably male. I corrected the driver politely. He did it again. When I corrected him once more, he apologized and offered an explanation. He said he had suffered a massive heart attack several years earlier. During the medical emergency, he had stopped breathing and sustained brain damage from a lack of oxygen. According to him, the injury sometimes caused him to use the wrong words. For a moment, I felt guilty for being angry. Then another thought replaced the guilt. If his brain injury affected his language and judgment so noticeably, should he be responsible for driving medically vulnerable passengers across state lines? I tried to remain friendly. We still had 3 hours in his car, and conflict would not help my son. The driver talked as we left the hospital. I answered him. For a short time, the journey seemed merely uncomfortable rather than dangerous. Then he picked up his phone and began texting while driving. We were moving at road speed. My sick child was in the vehicle. The driver looked down at the screen instead of the road. I told him to stop. He said he was only texting his wife to tell her that he had started the return journey. I told him it did not matter who he was texting. He could have sent the message before leaving the hospital. If it was urgent, he could pull over. He was not going to text while driving with my child in the car. I did not shout. I was direct. He was visibly irritated, but he put the phone down. After that, his behavior changed. He stopped speaking to me. When I tried to make friendly conversation, he ignored me. The silence no longer felt like tiredness. It felt punitive, as if he wanted me to understand that correcting him had made me his enemy. I eventually opened my Kindle and began to read. From the corner of my eye, I saw him slowly slide the phone onto his leg. The movement was secretive. He was not simply checking the time. He was trying to position the screen where he believed I could not see it. I switched off the Kindle and looked directly toward the road. He sighed sharply and lowered the phone into the center console. A few minutes later, I returned to my book. He tried again. The pattern repeated several times. He would raise the phone. I would stop reading. He would sigh and put it away. For the rest of the journey, I could not relax. I watched the road, watched his hands, and thought about how little control a passenger has once a vehicle is moving. I was not only responsible for myself. My son was beside me, weakened by treatment, dependent on me to make sure we reached home safely. We finally arrived close to midnight. The driver handed me the logbook without speaking. He did not help carry the bags, even though drivers were supposed to assist. I did not care. I signed, collected our belongings, and got my son inside. I thought the ordeal was over. Less than 30 minutes later, my phone received a message from a blocked number. That had never happened before. The message was a stream of insults. It attacked my appearance, my personality, and my character. There was no name attached to it, and no direct admission of who had sent it. I could not prove it came from the driver, but the timing was difficult to ignore. Very few people had my number. The transport service and its driver had access to it because of the scheduled journey. The message arrived almost immediately after an angry man who knew my address had dropped us at home. I saved the message but did not respond. The next day, my husband persuaded me to report the driver's texting to the transport company. I described what had happened in the car. I did not mention the anonymous insult because I had no evidence connecting it to him. For about a week, nothing else happened. Then an investigator from the company called. I provided the facts. The driver had repeatedly used his phone while transporting a child returning from chemotherapy. The investigator told me he would be formally written up and required to complete additional training. The following day, another message arrived from a blocked number. This one was more aggressive. It contained personal attacks, vague threats, and a complaint about someone interfering with another person's livelihood. That phrase changed everything. The first message might have been a coincidence. The second arrived just after the company disciplined the driver and referred to the exact consequence of my report. Still, I lacked technical proof. Over the next several days, the messages continued. Their tone escalated. The person behind them seemed angrier each time, as though my silence itself was an insult. I began to think about the information the driver possessed. He knew my phone number. He knew my child's medical circumstances. He lived in our town. And he knew exactly where we lived. The next message removed almost all doubt. It specifically referred to the complaint made to the transportation company. Then it included a direct threat and a reminder. He still had my address saved in his GPS. This was no longer an unpleasant exchange with an anonymous number. It was someone telling a mother that he knew where to find her family. I went to the police. They opened an investigation, but the messages had been sent from an untraceable prepaid phone. Without a traceable number or direct admission, proving the sender's identity was difficult. I changed my phone number. The messages stopped. I also contacted the transport company again. This time, I provided the texts and the police report. The police had already spoken to the company, and the driver was dismissed. That should have made us feel safe. Instead, losing his job gave him another reason to blame me. My family moved soon afterward. Some people might consider that an extreme response to messages from an unconfirmed sender. Most threats are never carried out. Many people use frightening language because they enjoy the control it gives them. But this man had transported my sick child. He knew our home. He had ignored safety rules while driving, reacted with hostility when corrected, and appeared to retaliate after being reported. We were not willing to gamble our family's safety on the hope that he was only talking. After the move, life gradually became quieter. Nearly a year passed. Then, during the first week of May, we were watching the 6 o'clock news. A local report described a violent argument between two brothers. One brother had been stabbed more than 20 times. He later died at the hospital. Police were searching for the other brother on suspicion of a murder. The news showed the wanted man's name and photograph. I recognized him immediately. It was the driver, the man who had sat behind the wheel with my son and me for 3 hours. The man who had become angry when I told him to stop texting. The man I believed had threatened my family and reminded me that he knew our address. He was arrested before the 11 o'clock news. I will never know whether he truly intended to act on the threats he sent me. I cannot prove what would have happened if we had stayed at that address. And the fact that he was later accused of terrible violence does not prove every suspicion I had before it. But when his face appeared on the television, one thought overwhelmed every other one. Moving had not been an overreaction. 3 stories, 3 different kinds of access. The first stranger gained access because 3 exhausted passengers opened a car door without checking the details. The second assembled an address from information its owner believed was anonymous. The third received a family's address and phone number because his job required them. None of the people in these stories invited danger into their lives. They made ordinary decisions under ordinary pressure. They trusted a vehicle that appeared when expected. They answered a message from someone with a similar life. They accepted transportation provided by an insurance company. That is what makes these stories difficult to forget. Danger does not always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives looking almost identical to the thing you were waiting for. Before you get into a rideshare, check the registration number and ask the driver to confirm your name. Before sharing personal experiences online, remember that separate details can form a complete picture when someone collects enough of them. And when a person who knows where you live begins making threats, document everything and take the fear seriously. Thank you for listening to Night Evidence. If you have a true experience you would like us to consider, you can contact the show at nightevidence.show@gmail.com. Identifying details can be changed to protect your privacy. Until next time, stay alert. And when a stranger arrives exactly where you are waiting, make sure they are the person they claim to be.